Okay, here we are for another episode of It's Not What You Think. And today we're covering the years 500 BC to 180. The name of this episode, we're calling it Dragon Voices. Why are we calling it Dragon Voices?
Well, the two pieces that we're listening to a piece from China, and we're listening to a piece from ancient Gaul, and both of which incorporate, the album from ancient Gaul is actually called Dragon Voices, but as we all know, dragons are they're throughout Chinese culture, so it seemed fitting for both cultures, despite the fact that they're thousands of miles apart.
And by the way, this is Rick.
And this is Darren.
And welcome. So what we have here, we're going to start off with, it's a hymn to Confucius. And I chose this one because the melody is either attributed to or said to have been played by Confucius. And Confucius lived 551 BC to 479 BC, which puts him right in this ballpark. And I think it's kind of cool. Even if he didn't write it, it would be really awesome if he wrote it.
Yeah.
But even if he didn't write it, and even if he didn't play it, the reality is he probably heard it.
Yeah, most definitely.
And it's definitely within his time period, and he probably heard it. So I think that's pretty cool. And so we're going to give this a listen to, the Hymn of Confucius. Say that this is music of imperial rituals, and it definitely sounds it.
Oh yeah. In fact, where you had just stopped it sounded like the guy was calling people in. And I wish I knew what he was saying, but it sounds like a command.
Yes, and the call and response that is very indicative of Western music. It almost sounded like that's where he was doing, like that. He would say one thing really loud, and then the chorus would come in afterwards. And
I might be incorrect on this, but it sounds like it if my recollection serves, that little bell chimes, and then he shouts out as if to sort of signify that we're about to command something.
Right.
And then if I'm correct, the bell will chime again, and then the response will come.
All right, let's listen. I know what's indicative of Chinese music is a lot of bending of the notes.
Yeah.
And I can hear quite a number of that in here. And also, when I'm listening to this, the harmonies are definitely harsh on the Western ear.
Mm.
They're unusual harmonies to my listening. Not only the harmonies that are being sung, but the musical harmonies, because there's lots of microtones in there. There's we haven't gotten to the well-tempered system, and
Right.
so
Right.
so all these clashing of notes, it's difficult.
Yeah, and I know what you mean too. Is that it's like it's not the sort of synchronized harmonics that we're used to that
Mhm.
are, you know, soothing to the ear. It's harsh.
Mhm.
I don't even know if they're in the same harmonic scale or whatever the musical phrase would be.
Mhm.
That you wouldn't harmonize those two notes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it is harsh, but I don't. Again, I don't know that they're going for like good music. They might be
Right.
going for ritualistic
Yeah.
music.
Right. It's functional. It has a message, and the message is being given with the music.
But it certainly is antithetical to Confucius's teachings on balance, because you would think that if you were trying to convey balance, your harmonies would be in sync and not, opposed.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, I think that's with the assumption that we understand uh, Eastern harmonic
yeah,
theory, and I don't.
right, agreed.
新亚县民，新竹县
I was noticing this very percussive sound that is being made by some string.
Yeah.
I don't think they had upright stringed instruments. I think they were all horizontal
lap steel,
instruments.
yeah.
Yeah. But you can hear it slapping against the wood every
Mm.
time he plucks it or she plucks it. It's
Yeah.
and it's kind of in the back. It had a pulse.
Mm.
撤
I'm really enjoying the bell.
Yeah.
Dang, dang, dang. It's the one clarity that I'm searching for.
Yeah, but it keeps the rhythm in a very open way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the one driving force. But I think the word you used was perfect. Clarity.
Mhm.
It is the sense of clarity because and before we had stopped it to mention the clanging of the instrument, I was noticing how just nothing seemed. It seemed so chaotic, from my own perspective.
Yeah.
And again, I think that this is a culture clash from east to west, but the vocals don't particularly seem to go with the instruments. The instruments don't seem to harmonize with the vocals. They're doing that thing where, as I was mentioning earlier, the instrumentation is driven by the syllables of the vocals.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not aligned in any melodic sense.
Right.
It's rhythmically aligned, and that's it. But that bell, bing, it clarifies everything.
Mm-hmm.
宋城风
Well, the one thing it was not predictable.
That's for sure.
Because every single time you and I says, "Here comes the bell," there wasn't a bell.
That's true. But every time you heard a bell, it seemed to follow one simple structure. A piece would end. There would be a piece of silence for maybe a second or two,
Right.
and then you would hear the bell, and then the guy would start the next piece.
Right.
That's the only structure that I could find.
Yeah, I agree.
In that whole piece.
I mean, because even that ending with the drum that came in and gave a pulse, and then the scraping of the scraper.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that at all.
And I was waiting for, similar to with the Great Learning, I was waiting for a punctuation mark.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to kind of just end.
Yeah.
Which was odd.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's Confucianism.
Right. Maybe.
大学之道在明明德，在亲民，在朝之先。地址离后有定，定而后令静，静而后令安，安而后令儒，儒而后令德。没有本末，孰有终始？地所善好，接近道义。故之欲明明德于天下者，先治其国；欲治其国者，先治其家；欲治其家者，先修其身；欲修其身者，先静其心；欲静其心者，先行其。
So we just listened to the grand etude, and it was a reciting. And now we're going to listen to part 2 of the Grand Etude.
自成自也，大学空识之一说，而初学入德之。 于今可见古人类学此地者。
So what I notice is that he starts off singing in his register, and then he goes way outside of his register into like falsetto land.
Yeah, but without, he doesn't lose any of the properties of the music of the his vocals, his vocality. It's the same, just completely. I would say definitely out of his register. But I mean, it's consistent with the tonality that he's looking for.
Right, right.
学者必有时而学焉，则疏忽其不察矣。 大学之道，才明明德，才亲民，才止于至善，知之而后有敌。
So what strikes me now is that since it is written by Confucius, at least the text, and whether the melody is, it's kind of questionable. But like it reminds me of when I would go to church and the priest would sing, and his voice is horrible.
Yes.
But you're not supposed to listen to it as a piece of performed music. You're supposed to listen to it as a ritual service. And maybe that's what this is. You know, maybe they're not going for a piece of performance. They're going for a ritual music.
I think so, but in my opinion anyway, and so I've been exposed to it in the past, it seems to follow traditional Chinese style, where it's not driven so much by the instrumentality. It's more driven by the vocals. And so that's why you end up with the instruments kind of following the spoken word as opposed to the other way around. So every time there's a pluck of a string, it's a different phenom. He's saying something. It's a different syllable for every pluck of the string. But it is interesting that at the part we are, that he has gone from his falsetto to a full-on belt.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's particularly well sung, but to your point, it's probably meant to be more of a ritual.
因而后能静，静而后能安，安而后能虑，虑而后能得。无有本末，实有 终始，之所先后，今则报矣。不知于民，明德于天下者，先知其国，欲知其国者。
And I think it's really evident that each of the musical plucks on the instrument that they're playing is following the syllables of the vocals.
Right. And he really went into his own range at this point. It's more pleasing to listen to.
Mm-hmm. And I'm waiting for bells, because I know that is, from at least from my research so far, that a bell is a pretty traditional Confucianist mechanism. They use it to notate things.
And Temple Bells is part of the instrumentation on the CD. So,
yeah. Yep.
Hopefully we'll get to those.
其其家，欲其家者，先修其身，欲正之心者，先知其意；欲诚其者，先知其和。知之在歌舞，舞歌之后知之，知之而后意诚，意诚而后心正，心正之后身修，身修而后家齐，家齐而后国之。国之而后天下平。
It's starting to get exciting.
Yeah, it's starting to
know?
pick up a little bit.
Yeah, and he's got some emotion in his voice, and you know, and it's starting to develop pictures, and I'm really enjoying it now.
Yeah. It's far from the how it began and the falsetto and sort of a ritual. It still feels a little ritualistic.
Yeah, and almost dramatic.
Right.
I can imagine he's got some face paint on.
Yeah.
He's doing some very dramatic movements as he's reciting it.
Yeah. No, it is. It's getting exciting.
自天子以至于庶人，皆世皆以修身为本，其本乱而莫之者辟，其所后者薄，而其所薄者厚，谓之有也。
Okay, I have a guess. I don't know for a fact, but my intuition tells me that he tried to hit the lowest note he can possibly hit, and then he tried to hit the highest note he could possibly hit during the course of the piece.
Huh.
Because we were commenting he was going outside of his range and he was hitting falsetto, and then it just ended with the lowest bass pitch that I think he could do.
Yeah. Curiously enough, it ended on a single syllable in sort of the same way that a Christian prayer when sung ends with the Amen.
Oh, right.
But also, if you ever notice that when you do that in church, or at least it did with my church, you always sing it on a low note. It's always a low, guttural amen. It's
Right.
not high as if you were
Right,
singing.
right.
So I don't know if it was sort of a punctuation mark on what he had just sung.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting, and I was paying attention to how he was singing at the end, because it seemed like he started off the song sort of mellow and a little more easy, got real guttural and like vocal towards the middle, and he seemed to sort of taper off at the end, but he didn't quite go back to the softer melodies, and I was expecting it.
He still had some residual emotion. I don't know if it was anger or something else, but there was residual emotion in that last note.
Yeah. Well, and it seemed like it was that the last few notes of this piece were the balance of the original falsetto and the middle sort of angrier part. Balance is a fundamental part of Confucius philosophy.
Right.
So I don't know if maybe that's what he's driving at.
And we certainly don't know what the lyrics mean.
No clue. I did look up the Great Learning.
Okay.
The translation of it, but I don't think it's what we listen to.
Right. Okay. It's really unclear which of these melodies may have been written by Confucius or around the time of Confucius, but I gather that the hymn to Confucius may have even been given to him as like a gift. Isn't that great though, that like someone would give a song as a gift?
Wait, everybody! Woody hasn't given me his present yet.
Oh. That's right, Kelly. I'd like to sing you a little song I wrote for you. Kelly, 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 Kelly. Kelly, 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 Why? Because you're Kelly, 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 Kelly of mine.
Well, I think it speaks to where we are in time, right? And we've been discussing sort of the progression of music kind of coinciding the progression of human culture.
Right.
And so as of right now, while people at the time were probably writing music, to give a piece of written music is at that time like carving a statue.
Right, yeah.
It's sort of similar. So that would be, I think that would be a great honor. And it certainly speaks to the ancient Chinese reverence for Confucius, the man.
Right.
So now we're going to move into the Celtic region with Dragon Voices, which is incidentally the name of this episode. The cool thing about this, as I was reading it, is that these guys are music archaeologists.
Yeah.
So they were excavating sites with an aim at producing the music of the region, and they ended up finding artifacts from the Celtic region, in particular the Carnyx, which is a giant horn with the head of a boar on the top of it.
Or a dragon.
And interestingly enough, there are accounts of the Carnices, as they're described, that were used during Julius Caesar's campaign in Gaul, and then Claudius's invasion of ancient Britain. And I think they were probably used more as an instrument of war to intimidate, more than to be musical.
Yeah, because I mean, look at those things.
Yeah, it is pretty
giant
terrifying.
Long neck and the head on it.
And could you imagine in an army you see hundreds of them aligned and they're all blowing this terrible sounding. It's probably terrifying. So this is really cool, and I think interestingly enough that it is, we can probably juxtapose the music that's out of here with the music that we heard on the Kilmartin sessions, because the ancient Celtic, ancient Gaelic traditions are contemporary to ancient Scotland. Probably Celts settled in Scotland as well. So this will be cool. I think this will be really interesting. And honestly, I enjoyed most of this music from a perspective of, studying music.
I did too. And to be clear, what we're going to hear is not music that was written from that time period. We have instruments that were found around 200 BC.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't found in 200. They were dated 200 BC.
Right.
And then the person decided to compose some music for them so we can get an idea of what they sound like. But the actual music has been lost.
Yeah, and what's really cool about this is that this culture spanned enormous stretches of ancient Europe. They found a Carnyx in Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Right.
Stone inscriptions in Brittany, which is northwestern France.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have pieces that they discovered in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So
There are 3 of them.
there's
Look at the first, there.
Yeah, there's the Tintignac Carnyx, which I think was actually original, or derived after 1st century original finding.
Mm-hmm.
The Deskford Carnyx, which they found, it was again they found one that was dated to 1st century BC. And then later, they found one in 1816 in Scotland. And then there's the Loftnashade horn, which was commissioned by the project that developed this music after a find from dating from the 1st century BC in Ireland. So they found pieces in Ireland, Scotland, and France that are consistent with the culture.
I want to start off with a solo, just a solo so we can hear the horn. Duo, solo, here we go. Oh, The Hunt, that's what I have.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh no, I have After the Hunt.
I had After the Hunt on my mind as
Yeah,
well.
so we'll listen to The Hunt. Okay, so what we're going to listen to now is a piece that is called The Hunt, and it's for solo Carnyx, so we can get an idea of what the Carnyx sounds like, just unaccompanied. Here it goes. I mean, he really gave you the full gamut of what this thing can sound like.
Yeah, and it was pretty cool, the diversity of the sounds that he got out of there, especially when he was sort of like, I don't know what the word would be, but he was making that...
The staccato.
Yes,
yeah.
Really cool. But then at the end, kind of just letting it out, wailing it, which is more or less how I imagine this
like a trumpet
being
would
used.
sound like.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think the long, like bellowing, like monstrosity would come to the foreground in war, you know.
But the cool thing is this, and I think that these were actually, the originals were bronze as well. So these actually, the Carnyx actually sounds more like a modern day horn than anything we've listened to so far.
Right. That's true. And so we're starting to get a transition from the ancient instruments to the modern instruments.
Right. And here it is, the first, which, ironically enough, is a monotonal sort of horn, and well, it's a little more like a bugle.
Right.
The tones you get out of it are from yourself,
Right.
as opposed to having
valves or anything.
where we saw the natural instruments from a conch shell being a sort of monotonal in the same way, and then developing into bone flutes that had notches for different tones.
Yeah.
So here we have the first instrument that's bronze.
Right. We've
That's
got a new
monotonal.
material that we can cast.
And we start from
We
square
start
one.
from- Yeah, that's really neat. We're gonna move into the track right after that. It's called After the Hunt, and I like this one because there's a drum that accompanies it, and also you hear some whispering sounds.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty neat. So look out for that. I found this one to be interesting because of the whispering style or breathiness that he included in right around the 1 minute mark.
Well, the other cool thing is that he's also getting out those the diverse sounds of the horn, and so I think this piece as a whole, like holistically, with drum part that's added and the little whisperers, and then the diversity of the horns, and I think there's probably other horns being played, probably all three of them, in the background. It's sort of like
yes, you're right.
It's sort of like a background noise. I don't know how best to describe it. Sort of a environmental. This is probably the most symbolic of Celtic culture, even though this is a stylized piece, not necessarily original.
How is it representative of Celtic culture?
So there's a lot.
Assuming I have no clue what Celtic culture is.
The Celts were pretty shamanic. So
Yeah.
they would do ritualistic things, and part of that, in pop culture anyway, part of that shamanic is that whispering.
Let's pretend I don't
Sort
know
of.
anything about shamanic culture. What's that?
So they would have a shaman, a priest, a magic man, in common parlance, who would lead a ritual to
It's like medicine man.
a medicine man who would lead a ritual to a particular god, and the Celts would worship their gods in groves. So it's very naturally derived.
Right, and actually, when you say their god, nature, I think, was their primary god.
Yeah, I'm not sure
or
if they
at
had
least,
it. I'm
or
not
at
sure
least
if
their
they-
god was the expression of nature.
Yeah, I think that's more appropriate. I think they do have. I think they do have a pantheon of gods. I wouldn't know them if you were to ask.
Right.
But I think it's somewhat derived. It's probably some combination of animism and the Nordic traditions.
Right,
So
right.
there's, but I do think the main focus is nature, which probably is why they have animals on their horns.
Yeah. I know Celtic mythology had a lot of heroes and a lot of nature spirits.
Yep.
I'm having a hard time picking out like a god in their pantheon.
Yeah, I if you were to ask, I wouldn't know.
Right.
But yeah, I can imagine. So the way that I'm imagining this after the hunt is as it's titled, that they would come back, obviously celebrating that they've just downed some game, and probably doing some type of ritual around the animal in sort of the same way that you have that appreciation for nature that the Native Americans do. I would imagine that the ancient Celts sort of had a similar thing.
Right,
And
right.
that whispering is kind of like a shaman doing a prayer over a dead carcass as they're about to carve it up and serve the community.
You know, it just came to me when you're talking about shamanism and mythology, that the hunt was very mythological for the Celtics. And I even think there might be a god of the hunt.
That would not surprise me. I feel like a lot of pantheons have a god of the hunt.
I'm going to look this up right now because... Okay, well, I'm getting Cernunnos. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But he seems,
associated with stags, serpents.
yeah, he seems to be the Celtic god of the hunt. So that certainly could be where this guy was going with this.
Yeah.
Because the other tracks, the shaman, and Cuchulainn is another Celtic hero from mythology.
So oddly enough, Cernunnos is rooted from the word Carnon, which means horn.
Oh, wow, okay.
So
There you go. And then horn certainly could be the stag horn.
yeah, right.
But it obviously translates also into the musical horn.
Right.
Of the instrument.
And Carnix. So if Carnon is the root word of this god, it seems to me that Carnon is probably the root word of the Carnix.
Carnix, right. Yeah, I'm with you. I want to listen to Cuchulainn.
Okay.
So I like this particular piece because, again, it showcased the various various sounds you can get from this horn, and his style of playing. I mean, it's not just here's the horn sound. He started doing these like little runs with the horn at the end, percussive too.
Well, and I think it fits. If you think about it, humans at this point have come from, as we were talking earlier, have come from the sort of naturally derived monotonal, and so they've worked their way up. They probably have at this point guidance on how to play, and so I would imagine that outside of its use in war, which is probably again, as I think the main use of the Carnyx, outside of its use in war, they probably did something similar to that. To get these different sounds out. And as you were talking, it's sort of jazzy, the way that they're kind of improvising.
Speaking of war, you got a quote that you wanted to read.
Yeah, so the Carnices were used in war, and there's a description from a Diodorus Siculus around 660 BC about Julius Caesar's campaign in Gaul, and they say, quote, "Their trumpets again are of a peculiar barbarian kind. They blow into them and produce a harsh sound which suits the tumult of war." So I think, and this is the Roman description of these horns, they were probably used to intimidate enemies, but potentially, because of the diversity of the sounds that they can get, to use as battlefield commands. You imagine you can't scream as loud as a horn can blow, so if you have different tones and you can produce these different sounds, one might mean to charge, one might mean to protect the right flank, and another is like you get your slingers and you start, you know, so
yeah, it's completely understandable.
They probably would have one with each of the commanders of each of their units, and then they would sound off a different horn.
Yeah, because I think I read in here that you can actually hear these like 2 miles away.
That makes sense. So they would probably have their commander way in the back, away from the battle, giving commands to the people on the battlefield. The people on the battlefield probably had them too, as sort of intimidating. But I would imagine that the one the commander had was probably bigger, more decorative, louder.
Well, and you said more decorative, because one of these has no decoration on it whatsoever, from what I can tell.
Right.
At least what the picture's showing. And then the other one is, I mean, that is just...
Right.
So, yeah, I can totally imagine Commander having that one, and then maybe some of the frontline guys who are more trying to intimidate have this other bell-shaped one.
Sort of like the ram's horn that they would use.
Right. I want to hear this particular piece called Calanese.
Okay. I was just remarking about the fact that this piece features a lot of sounds from nature, whether it's
Does.
birds. I think there's
The
waves,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is
Oh, it says Deskford Trio with Skylark and Waves, and I didn't know what they meant by Skylark, but that's the name of the bird.
right, right.
Okay.
But I think again, this is symbolic of Celtic culture,
Right.
The reverence for nature.
Right. And it also carries over from previous episodes and the evolution of music. It all began with imitating nature.
Right,
And
right.
so it makes sense that, like you said, we're starting off with a new cast instrument that's made of bronze. We're still developing an appreciation for metalworking, and we have a horn that is kind of monotonous. And so, since they're starting with that, then starting with the imitation of nature, the bird sounds and waves, and how he puts that into the piece.
Well, the cool thing about this piece too is the way that he plays the horn. It's not as piercing and it's more soothing. In fact, it sounds like it fits with the nature music that's in the
Right.
background.
It sounds almost, to me, it almost sounds like a trombone.
Yeah.
It's very clean, and you get those long sounds.
Right. Right. Yeah, and again, I mean, I have to just say about this particular instrument that it is pretty diverse in the sounds that they're getting out of it for an instrument of war, which really I
Right.
think it was.
Right.
They're getting great sound out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there was one on here that featured a conch shell.
You read my mind. I'm going to play that one right now. It's called Shaman 2.
That's go figure.
Okay, when I go back and edit this episode, I think I'm going to stick in Stuart Dempster's playing of the conch shell just to remind the audience of a previous episode and what Stuart Dempster was like, because he has the classic, here's what the conch shell sounds like.
Right, right.
And this guy, I mean, he was incredible because he played it in every way but the traditional classic way of playing a conch shell.
Right, and similar to how he was playing the Carnix, he's getting that like jazzy sort of sound to it.
Yeah, he put a really rhythmic emphasis to it.
Yeah. Wasn't just that monotonal blow into a conch shell and here's the sound.
And then he started to give these guttural kind of remind me of how Ian Anderson plays the flute. If you remember Jethro Tull, he does some while he's playing, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of that, or at least the style was bring in the voice and have your voice resonate through the instrument.
Right. The way he's growling into it too, to kind of get that, like, I don't even know, it sounds like a wolf or a bear sort of growling in a cave. It was really cool. I mean, this especially has been a unique way of playing the conch shell.
Yeah, and I'm glad he brought it back. This particular CD, I'm glad they brought it back.
Right.
Because it gives it that...
the send-off that we need before we go.
I wasn't going to say that, but I think you're right, though.
Go to bed now, conch shell.
Right.
We've used
We've
you.
Exhausted you.
We're going to bronze now. But no, I particularly liked this piece too, especially the title of it is Shaman.
Right.
It invokes that sort of animism in the beginning where he's growling and then he gets all of those sounds out of the conch shell that we hadn't seen before. So,
and indicative to shamanism and the utilization of nature and the artifacts of nature, like the conch shell and this in the water and the birds. This next piece is called Calican, and it features not only the Carnac solo, but also seed and pod shakers. Because you get these pods, and the seeds, they have some space in them, and so you shake them, and they're like little rattles.
That's pretty cool.
Well, I got the image of a snake, a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
And I think that fits with the whole theme of shamanism that he's going for in this particular CD.
Mm-hmm.
And did you confirm that there are rattlesnakes in
I did.
that part
Yeah.
of the world?
Yep. There are.
There you go. So it kind of makes sense.
And I wonder too if snakes are revered in the same way. We saw one of the carnices that they discovered had the head of a snake, and so that could have been symbolic in some way. And,
Well, and also a dragon is a snake with wings.
right.
So the whole mythology of dragons and snakes kind of overlap.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. The cool thing about this particular piece is that they utilized that shaker in a way that sounded like a washboard,
Mm-hmm.
and so it gave it that rhythm, that
Right. So it wasn't just a sound effect.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we see it with the diversity of the horn behind it.
Right.
And again, I think I just have to keep saying it. It's funny to see an instrument of war used in a way that's not.
Very musical.
Yeah, it's not as shrill. It's more jazzy.
And I think it's a testament to this guy. His name is John Kenny, and he's the primary composer. Once again, I'm going to repeat myself, but none of this music is actually found from the time period. The instruments are found from the time period, and he composed his own music to let you hear what it sounds like.
Right.
And I have to say that it's a testament to John Kennedy that you're not just getting one sound.
Right.
Out of an instrument of war
Right.
that was not made for music, that was made for, like you said, dictating orders from across the battlefield. And now here's this guy who found one, and he's like, okay, well, let's hear what it sounds like. But let's also get some variation on it. Let's see what this can do. You know, it's like getting a new car. Let's full throttle. Let's see what this baby can do.
Right. And again, I mean, not just with the Carnix too, what he did with the conch shell, but
right.
I mean, it is definitely a testament to him, both as a composer and as a musician, of the sounds that he's gotten out of these ancient and primitive instruments.
Right.
Um,
Well, we're going to hear our last piece. This one's called Ocean Stone, and it's for Deskford solo. Deskford is the name of the Carnax that he found in Scotland, so I think it's a good piece to end on.
okay.
So that piece started off, I put in my notes, meditative.
Yeah.
Nice long notes, not overwhelming the senses. It's just, and maybe what it could have been like to hear on the battlefield. Long drawn out notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends percussive with a little bit of that.
So there's notes at the end where he would play the one real loud one, follow it on. That real loud tone, and it really sounded like a trombone there.
Mhm.
That's how I imagined that they would play it if they were running into battle with that. Just blaring.
Right.
And if you have, and there's imagery of it on some of the carvings that are contemporary to the time, of the army going in, and behind the army are the people holding the carnixes, and I imagine that they're blowing them. In the carving, there's only 3 of them, but I imagine there's way more than that, and you can imagine it's like if you're a Roman soldier seeing an oncoming Gaelic charge, it's like a tractor trailer coming right at
sound.
you. Yeah. And everybody's screaming, ah!
Mm-hmm. Now, you know what's interesting? Before this CD, now, I am guilty that a lot of my history comes from Hollywood. And I know that's inaccurate and wrong, but that's part of the world I grew up in. And this is the first time I've heard of these. I mean, in movies, I never come across this.
Oh, the Gauls?
No, the Carnax.
Oh, the Carnax, yeah. No, I've never seen it before ever, except for here.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Until I discovered this CD, Dragon Voices, with John Kenny, the giant Celtic horns of ancient Europe, I didn't know these existed.
Yeah, no, I didn't either. I knew the Gauls existed.
Right, yeah, that I was at least familiar with. But, this is a find for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I just have to say it again, John Kenny is a phenomenal musician when it comes to these ancient pieces.
I agree,
And
yeah.
I think he really plays them with like an appreciation for the instrument, not just its historical value, but its value in what it is we're exploring in terms of the evolution of music.
Oh, speaking of John Kenny, I was able to get something that wasn't on here. He wrote a piece, a composition, scored it out for the Carnax. And I have it, so let's give that a check out.
Definitely.
John Kenny, the voice of the Carnacs. This piece is for 1 live and 4 multi-tracked Carnacies, and as such it was recorded in a single take in the main hall of the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. This is the first ever notated piece for the Carnacs and the first composition for the instrument for at least 1800 years. What do you think he was trying to get across?
Oh, I think he was trying to get across the fact that the Carnacs can be used as an instrument and not just an instrument of war.
Okay.
I get the sense that the Carnacs is difficult to compose for because it's like composing for a conch shell.
Right, right.
It's monotonal. You're not getting a whole lot out of it, but he gets a lot, and he's demonstrated that he can get a lot out of it. So and it's got to be difficult to play.
I know.
The thing is like 6-7 feet tall.
Yeah, you're
and
balancing
and top
it in
heavy.
addition to playing it.
Right. So it's got to be difficult to play. So I think he's trying to demonstrate the Carnacs as an instrument. I don't think he's trying to convey any type of cultural significance in the sense of the Carnacs' value in ancient Celtic traditions. I think he's just using it as a demonstration of the Carnacs' diversity in sound.
I agree. Musically, it wasn't that interesting to me.
No, I didn't think so.
It was like if I were to put it in, I would say an experimental modern piece of music. It didn't sound ancient.
No.
The piece, I mean, obviously the instrument does, but the piece didn't sound like it was an ancient instrument. So I think you're right. It was kind of like, here's an experimental piece, and in experimental music, a lot of times they explore the range of the instrument and what it can do. Like, if you've heard of Density by Varese, it's for the flute, and he goes to the highest note of the flute and the lowest note of the flute, and then all the different ways you can play the flute. And so that kind of reminded me of this. He's doing all these different things you can play with it. So it's not something you want to turn on the radio and jam to.
Right.
So it's more of an experimental modern composition that explores the whole range of this particular piece. If you had to choose one word that represents that, what would it be?
Ambitious, I think is the best. I mean, it's like you say, it's experimental, and I think he's doing this to prove a point more to himself than to anybody else. I don't think anybody really particularly cares about the Carnacs. So I think he's proving a point to himself as an archaeologist, as a music archaeologist, that this is a cool ancient instrument, and here's how it can be played besides how we probably understand it was played. Which is cool. And I will say, for the piece, there were a couple standout parts, like the it's sort of reminiscent of the hunt from Planet of the Apes, which we explored in an earlier episode. And he does some pretty cool things with the Carnacs. I'd say that there's some standout parts of this that are pretty interesting. But overall, it's definitely. I mean, I would probably not ever show anybody.
Sure.
But like, I don't think anybody that I know would be like, "Oh, the Carnix, like, tell me more." You know, so.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. We listened to. I was about to read this music from the world, but very specifically the Hymn to Confucius,
Yes.
and then Dragon Voices with the Carnax. Out of these two CDs, would you recommend any to a friend?
Well, I did particularly like the Carnix, the Dragon Voices. I think that the tracks on that were really cool, especially the conch shell. I don't think anybody that I know would be drawn to the Confucian music. I think it's very shrill to the Western ear, and it sounds old. You know, it doesn't sound like a modern
Right.
piece of music. I would, given the choice, I would more likely recommend Dragon Voices to a friend than the Confucian music.
I think you're pretty spot on. I think this Chinese music, it really sounds ancient.
Yeah. Did you ever see Gangs of New York?
Mm-mm.
There's a scene in Gangs of New York where they go into a Chinese, and they might have been doing Japanese now that I think about it, but they go into an Asian sort of bar where they're doing a show, and it's that type of music.
Okay.
Where they bang, clang, clang, clang,
Yeah.
clang, and you know it's and the interesting thing about that particular scene is that it's the juxtaposition of New York in 1860s with
I could
the
totally,
West.
I could totally imagine it.
Right, and you know the people who are doing the Chinese music, they're all dressed in colorful garb, and it's really free flowing, and the New Yorkers in that scene are dirty and dark and wearing, you know, drab colors. But it does not suit the Western ear, I
Right.
don't think, at all.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Not that the Carnix is any better, but it's at least has some interest in its you know, in the diversity of the use of a primitive weapon of war, instrument of war.
I think we explored these to their fullest. You have any last words?
I just to say good night to the conch shell and.
Yeah, I think we put that to rest.
And hello to Bronze Horns.
Right on. Okay, we'll see you guys next week.
Stay tuned.